The only way we all learn things, whether we're trying to learn to increase our education or whether we're trying to find out what we can do for someone, is by asking those questions.
Whatever it is you provide, whether it's a product or a service, convenience is important, but relieving a challenge, or I'm sure anyone who is in sales has heard the word pain point, is even more important. Convenience is, well, that would be convenient. But something that really is getting in the way or really holding someone back, if you can aid them in overcoming that obstacle, that's priority number one, correct?
100%. And I think it's kind of interesting when you really take a look at this. It really doesn't matter what your medium is or what you're doing, and it can cross over many different scenarios. From your experience and public speaking, how many times do we see people that are selling from a stage, selling from a group of people up there? And whether your time that you're allotted is 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour or more, it's kind of hard to keep someone engaged that long. So if you're not asking them questions, if you're not finding some way to get them engaged, you're probably not going to be as successful in that manner. Or if it's one-on-one, the same type of thing. If I'm up just talking to you, you're going to listen for a certain period of time, and then we're going to lose connection. An interaction is always imperative, I think, no matter how you're communicating to someone, especially if you're trying to get them to buy something from you.
But, there's a cautionary aspect to this as well. And that is, you don't want to seem like you're interrogating. I think that's a crucial thing about the balance between establishing yourself as the expert and asking questions. So a blending of those two is really the sweet spot that most salespeople are looking for. So it's not just a matter of asking questions.
Especially when someone has an objection, a common sales technique is to feel felt found. Is to say, you know what, I understand exactly how you feel, Paul. I've worked with other people in your industry that have felt the same way. What they found when they did this is, here's the prescribed response. So when you can do that naturally, and with all these things we're talking about, I think one thing just to add to people is it is much more comfortable. You're going to get further if it's a conversation. Like you said, it's not an interrogation. And there's nothing wrong with at the beginning saying, Paul, I'd like to get a little bit more about know more about your business. Is it okay if I ask you a few questions? Now you've been given the right and the liberty to ask these questions. And as the old story goes, typically you don't want to ask a question you don't know the answer to, or at least part of the answer, to get you to step B, to step C, and to step D.
Let's take it to level 2, and that is, how about I have some questions? How about beginning that with a prepositional phrase, or actually an introductory phrase, which is, I know you'll have many questions for me. Ooh, that opens up something. In other words, this is a conversation. I know you'll have many questions for me, and I have some for you as well. So we'll be asking each other a bunch of questions. Sound fair?
I said, how about we kind of change the verbiage that we're using? We're not using prospecting. We're getting to know people. Once we get to know them and they're interested in your service, how about instead of having a sales call, we have a conversation? Because from that conversation, like you said, you're not trying to bring on customers. You're trying to build a relationship. So when you can take it a little bit personal, not too far, and like you were mentioning there a minute ago, that's something I do at the beginning of every sales call. As I say, Paul, I want to take a few moments to get to know you, and I'm going to tell you about myself. Because I think first and foremost, we need to have some common traits, some common mindsets, because in my experience, that's what's really going to help people and help relationships last longer, is when you can find ways to relate and take it slightly off the business, just I'm selling you and I want your money.
We all know what best practices are. And Glenn, you and I, we have worked with people, we have trained people, we have done all of that. So we know what the best practices are. And in fact, the people that we train know what the best practices are. But we also know what it feels like to be in the trenches. And I don't want to make it sound like sales is like a combative thing. But there are certain sensations, there are certain feelings that we all have when we are in the spotlight, when we know that we're in this circumstance of negotiating. I mean, sales, part of sales is negotiating, part of sales is navigating.
I think it's, if you're working in an office, if you're somewhere like that where you're making calls, you're communicating with people, I think behind your computer, you should write the word don't/doesn't. Because inevitably, I'm talking to salespeople and I'm like, what if Paul does this? And I reply back, what if he doesn't?
Mm-hmm.
Because we always think, what if negative? We don't think, what if the positive? And I mean, the reality is, you know what? Most of the things that we have that we are afraid of when it comes to sales, with communicating in any way you're doing, whether it be to a subordinate, a peer, someone above you that you're reporting to, is, oh my gosh, what if Paul says this to me? Or what if Paul thinks that? Well, what if he doesn't? Because more often than not, it's never going to happen.
Right, right. Now, and I know what you basically what you're describing there, Glenn, is people who have a responsibility to cold call. Is that?
It could be a cold call. You could be asking for, you're wanting to take time off from your boss. I mean, there's a multitude of reasons why all of a sudden someone's saying, oh my gosh, what if? Well, what if they don't? Then you don't have to worry about this. And inevitably, if you spend all of your time dealing with or dwelling on what if, you're never going to get through there because you're not going to know what happens until you get to the other side.